Hello, I'm Mr. Tom, and my mission is to take you deep into the heart of terror. Get ready to dive into frightening stories like never before. Put on your headphones and feel the true fear creeping closer as every word echoes in the darkness, making you question what's real. Are you ready for this journey into pure horror? Imagine booking the perfect place for a weekend getaway. Photos are stunning, the reviews are great, and you can't wait to relax. But what if I told you that behind those beautiful images, there are stories no one dares to tell? Stories that would make you think twice before spending the night at an Airbnb. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through 5 of these true and terrifying tales. But beware, after this, you might never look at an Airbnb the same way again. The room that should never have been rented. Everything seemed normal when Robert and his wife, Maria, arrived at the Airbnb they had booked for a short getaway in the countryside. The house was old but had a unique charm, with rustic furniture and a cozy atmosphere. The owner had mentioned that the master bedroom, where they would be sleeping, was particularly sought after by guests for its tranquility. However, on the first night, Robert began to feel that something was wrong. Maria was sleeping soundly beside him, but Robert couldn't close his eyes. He felt a presence in the darkness, an uncomfortable sense that they were not alone. The silence of the house was interrupted by a subtle sound, like a soft rustling, coming from the corner of the room. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself that it was just the wind or the sound of some animal outside. But the sound didn't stop, and the more he listened, the clearer it became. It was a whisper, something that seemed to be murmuring his name. Robert got up slowly, trying not to wake Maria. He approached the corner of the room where the sound was coming from, but there was nothing there, just darkness. Suddenly, a cold draft passed over him, as if a window had been opened, but all the windows were closed. That's when he felt it. Something lightly brushed against his arm, as if an invisible hand had touched his skin. Panic took hold of Robert, who quickly returned to bed and pulled the covers over himself, trembling. The next morning, he mentioned the incident to Maria, who laughed, saying he must have imagined it all. But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The second night, things got worse. The whisper returned, stronger this time, and not just for Robert. Maria heard it too, and they both began to notice that the room was colder, much colder than any other part of the house. On the third night, they could no longer ignore it. They woke up in the middle of the night to a loud noise, as if something had been thrown against the wall. When they turned on the lights, they saw deep scratch marks on the bedroom door, as if something had been trying to get in. Terrified, they decided to leave immediately. As they hurried down the stairs, they heard the whisper one last time, this time clearly saying, "You shouldn't be here." They left before dawn and never returned. But the Airbnb owner reported that since then, no one else has wanted to rent that room, and he began to wonder if the story about the former tenant who mysteriously disappeared many years ago was more than just a local legend. The isolated cabin and the whispers in the dark. Ana and Pedro were a couple who loved adventure, and when they found an isolated cabin in the mountains for a romantic weekend, they didn't hesitate to book it. The cabin was in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by ancient trees with a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains. It was the perfect place to relax and disconnect from the world. They arrived at the cabin at dusk, and everything seemed in perfect order. Fireplace was ready to be lit, kitchen was equipped, and the tranquility of the place was almost supernatural. But as night fell, the silence began to feel oppressive. The shadows of the trees lengthened, and the crackling of the fire in the fireplace seemed to be the only sound keeping them anchored in reality. That's when they heard it for the first time. A whisper, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. Ana looked at Pedro, but he seemed not to have heard it. She decided to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind passing through the leaves. But the whisper returned, this time closer, almost right next to the cabin. Pedro finally noticed it and went to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, he stepped outside, but found nothing but darkness and the cold wind blowing through the trees. The night continued, and so did the whispers. Now they seemed to be coming from inside the cabin itself. Ana began to feel uncomfortable, as if someone was always behind her, watching her every move. Fear began to set in, and they decided to lock themselves in the bedroom, hoping that dawn would bring some relief. But the early morning brought something much worse. The sound of heavy footsteps began to echo across the wooden floor of the cabin, moving from one side to the other. It seemed like someone, or something, was walking around the bedroom, trying to get in. Ana and Pedro were paralyzed with fear, hearing the sound of something scratching at the door, whispering unintelligible words, but filled with sinister intent. When the first ray of sunlight appeared, the sounds abruptly stopped. Their hearts still pounding, they decided to leave the cabin immediately. While packing their things, Pedro noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were claw marks on the door, exactly where they had heard the scratching the night before. Without looking back, they left, vowing never to return. The story of that cabin became a dark memory, something they didn't like to discuss, but would never forget. The apartment where mirrors reflect the past. Sofia had always been fascinated by history, and when she found an apartment in the heart of an old European city, with centuries of stories within its walls, she didn't hesitate to book it. The place was charming. Classic decor, antique furniture, and curiously, many mirrors scattered throughout all the rooms. It seemed like a dream for someone like her, passionate about bygone eras. On the first night, while exploring the apartment, Sofia noticed something peculiar about the mirrors. Sometimes they captured movements that didn't correspond to hers, as if there was someone else reflected there, but whom she couldn't see directly. Initially, she ignored it, thinking it was just the effect of the soft lighting or the exhaustion from the trip. But on the second night, things began to intensify. While getting ready for bed, she caught sight of a strange reflection in the bedroom mirror. It wasn't hers. The figure that appeared behind her was of a woman dressed in clothes from another era, staring intently, the look of despair. When Sofia turned around, there was no one there. Her heart raced, and she began to feel a heavy presence in the air, as if something was pressing down on her. Each night, the figure became clearer and the presence more intense. Sofia began to have trouble sleeping, feeling watched all the time. The mirrors seemed to be full of faces that didn't belong to anyone in the apartment, faces that watched her, desperate, as if they wanted to escape. She started having vivid nightmares where she was dragged into the mirrors, trapped in a dark world, full of shadows from the past. Desperate, Sofia tried covering the mirrors, but that only seemed to make things worse. The whispers began to echo in the apartment, and the reflections became more violent, with figures banging against the glass, trying to break free. On the last day of her stay, Sofia woke up to find all the mirrors shattered, shards scattered across the floor, and the faces, now outside the mirrors, hovering around her, silent but full of dark intentions. She left the apartment without looking back, and never again could she enter a place with mirrors without feeling a deep chill down her spine. That trip, which was supposed to be an exploration of her love for history, turned into a nightmare, would haunt her forever. If these stories are already giving you chills, just imagine what else is coming. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss any of these terrifying tales. Every time you click, helps us continue bringing you more of this spine-chilling content. The chalet in the mountains and the tracks that won't disappear. Joao and Clara decided they needed a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. They found a chalet in the mountains, surrounded by nature, where they could reconnect and enjoy the tranquility of winter. The snow was falling gently when they arrived, covering everything with a white, pristine blanket. The chalet was exactly as it had been in the photos, cozy, fireplace ready to be lit, and an incredible view of the surrounding mountain. On the first night, everything went well. They lit the fireplace, prepared a warm meal, and toasted to the perfect weekend. But the next morning, when they went out to explore the area around the chalet, they noticed something strange. Large tracks in the snow, like footprints, but much larger than any animal they knew. Tracks circled the chalet as if something had been stalking around during the night. Thinking it might be a bear, they decided not to worry. Something inside them was already unsettled. On the second night, the noises began. In the middle of the night, as the snowstorm raged outside, they heard the sound of something scratching at the walls of the chalet. Yuan got up to investigate but found nothing. However, the tracks were back, deeper and closer to the door. On the third night, the tracks were on the porch, as if something had been standing there, watching through the windows. Each night, the terror grew. Clara began having nightmares about huge, shadowy creatures, their eyes glowing in the dark. Watching them, the tracks in the snow grew deeper and deeper, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. On the last night, the noise was so loud that it woke them both up at the same time. A dark shadow passed quickly by the window, and the sound of something heavy falling on the roof made them scream in fear. When morning finally came, they decided to leave as quickly as possible. But as they left, they saw that the tracks not only surrounded the chalet, but also there were claw marks on the wood, as if something had tried to get in. That trip, which was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, turned into a living nightmare they would never forget. The house that never sleeps. Mariana and a group of friends decided to rent a large house for a weekend together. The house was in a rural area, far from the city, perfect for parties and laughs without disturbances. From the beginning, the house seemed ideal, spacious, modern, with a large garden and comfortable rooms. But there was something Mariana noticed right away. The lights seemed to have a life of their own, flickering occasionally, as if the electricity was unstable. But that wasn't the worst part. On the first night, while everyone was in the living room playing cards, the lights flickered again, this time going completely dark for a few seconds. When they came back on, everyone laughed nervously. Mariana felt something different, as if the house had changed, as if something had entered. She tried to push the thought away. The feeling of being watched remained. Second night, things got stranger. The doors began to open and close by themselves, and the noises in the hallways sounded like footsteps that no one was taking. One of the friends suggested that the house might be haunted. Everyone laughed, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. But that same night, when everyone went to bed, the noises intensified. Mariana woke up in the middle of the night with a heavy feeling on her chest, as if something was sitting on her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then she saw it, a dark, indistinct figure, standing in the corner of the room, watching her with eyes that were not of this world. She finally managed to move and turned on the light, but the figure had disappeared. Terrified, she ran to her friend's room, where she discovered she wasn't the only one to have had a terrifying experience. Everyone reported seeing shadows, hearing voices, and feeling an overwhelming presence in the house. They decided they would leave in the morning, but the house had other plans. On the last night, the lights flickered violently, and the footsteps turned into a frantic run in the hallways. Something was banging on the doors, trying to get into the rooms where they had locked themselves in. The house seemed to be alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy, and it didn't want to let them go. When morning finally came, they ran out, leaving behind belongings and a promise never to return. But the house is still there, waiting for new visitors, ready to trap more souls within its living walls, never to let them go. These are the 5 terrifying stories that show that an Airbnb isn't always the peaceful refuge it seems to be. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more, don't forget to share with your friends, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. After all, you never know where the next horror story might happen, or with whom. Until next time, and sleep well if you can.